Power is a dangerous drug, especially when it comes with a badge and a gun. But arrogance is something even more destructive. It is a silent poison that eventually consumes the very hand that wields it. Officer Grant Rourke believed he was untouchable when he noticed a luxury sedan parked near the courthouse and decided to have it towed out of pure racial spite. He wanted to teach the driver a lesson about who controlled the streets. But Rourke made one fatal mistake. The car belonged to the county's newly elected district attorney, and the district attorney was not merely going to recover his vehicle, he was going to dismantle the officer's entire life. Oak Ridge County existed in two sharply different realities, separated by the dark waters of the Conover River. On the north side, immaculate lawns and gated driveways concealed old money, inherited influence, and generations of political power. On the south side, broken pavement and flickering streetlights watched over a community that had been over-policed and underprotected for decades. Julian Carrington had grown up on the south side. Now, at 42, he occupied the corner office of the downtown courthouse as Oak Ridge County's newly elected district attorney. Carrington was a force of nature. Tall, impeccably dressed, and equipped with a mind that operated like a steel trap. His campaign had been built around one unwavering promise: accountability. He was the first black district attorney in Oak Ridge County's history, and his election sent a political earthquake through the county's established power structure. Nowhere were the aftershocks felt more violently than inside the precinct houses of the Oak Ridge Police Department. Officer Grant Rourke represented the old Oak Ridge. A veteran patrolman with a thick neck, heavy hands, and an aggressive manner, Rourke viewed the streets as his personal territory. To him, the law was whatever he declared it to be at any particular moment. Throughout his career, he had accumulated 24 civilian complaints involving allegations ranging from excessive force to racial profiling. The police union and a sympathetic old guard chief had buried every one of them. Rourke hated Julian Carrington with a consuming, instinctive bitterness. He hated Carrington's reform policies. He hated the mandatory body camera audits the district attorney had introduced. And in the quietest, darkest part of his own mind, he hated the fact that a black man from the South Side now possessed the authority to send police officers to prison. The afternoon heat pressed heavily against the city, rising from the asphalt in suffocating waves. Carrington had just completed an exhausting grand jury presentation involving a corrupt municipal contractor. Focused but drained, he had parked his personal vehicle, a pristine midnight blue Audi A6, in an overflow municipal parking lot located near the courthouse. The space was specifically reserved for county officials. Carrington's official laminated parking placard sat clearly in the center of the dashboard. Rourke was patrolling his sector in car 42 with the air conditioning blasting. A wad of chewing tobacco rested inside his mouth, turning his saliva brown. He was already in a vicious mood. Carrington's office had recently declined to prosecute a drug possession case submitted by Rourke after determining that the evidence had been obtained through an illegal warrantless search. Rourke felt humiliated. He felt stripped of his authority. When he turned onto Elm Street, the midnight blue Audi immediately caught his attention. Rourke slowed the cruiser to a crawl. He knew exactly who owned the vehicle. Information traveled quickly through the police department, and nearly every officer knew that the new district attorney drove a dark blue Audi. Rourke positioned his cruiser behind the sedan and entered the license plate into his mobile computer. The registered owner appeared on the screen: Julian Carrington. A slow, malicious smile spread across Rourke's face. He examined the parking space. The Audi was centered almost perfectly. The official county placard was clearly visible through the windshield. However, the rear tire extended slightly beyond a faded white line separating the municipal lot from a designated fire lane. The fire lane had not been used or repainted since the neighboring structure had been demolished years earlier. To any reasonable officer, it was meaningless. To Grant Rourke, it was a perfect opportunity for petty and vindictive revenge. "Let's see how important you feel when you're riding the bus, counselor," he muttered. Rourke did not contact municipal dispatch for an official tow. Doing so would create a formal paper trail that might attract a supervisor's attention. Instead, he removed his personal phone and called a number he knew from memory. "Harlan Towing, Wade speaking," a rough voice answered. "Wade, it's Grant," Rourke said, keeping his eyes fixed on the district attorney's car. "I have a live one behind the courthouse annex. It's blocking a fire lane, serious public safety hazard." Wade Harlan released a wet, rasping laugh. "Behind the courthouse? Are you sure about this? That's where the important people park." "Hook it and take it," Rourke sneered. "Bring it all the way to the county line yard. And make sure this one gets the premium storage charge." "You got it." Rourke remained inside his idling cruiser and watched like a predator as Harlan's rusted flatbed truck rattled toward the lot. He watched Wade climb from the cab, attach the winch to the front axle of the expensive sedan, and drag it violently onto the steel platform. The sound of the Audi's tires scraping across metal was music to Rourke. He issued no parking citation. He left no notice. He simply watched the vehicle disappear around the corner, spat tobacco juice onto the pavement, and drove away feeling like the king of Oak Ridge County. He had no idea that he had just ignited a fuse that would destroy his entire world. After completing his work at the courthouse, Julian Carrington loosened his silk tie, picked up his leather briefcase, and walked through the heavy glass doors. The oppressive heat had settled into a stagnant, humid evening. As he walked, he mentally reviewed his upcoming schedule and considered how much political pressure would be required to convince Mayor Preston Hale to approve an independent police oversight board. Carrington turned into the municipal parking lot and stopped. The place where he had left his Audi was empty. Only a rectangle of stained concrete remained. For one irrational moment, he wondered whether he had parked on another street. But Carrington possessed an almost photographic memory. He looked down. Fresh, deep grooves had been carved into the softened asphalt. They were unmistakable marks left by a towing winch. Carrington did not panic. He did not shout or strike a nearby object. He had built his career on cold analytical self-control. He removed his phone and contacted the police department's non-emergency line. Oak Ridge Dispatch, state your emergency or inquiry. This is District Attorney Julian Carrington. I am reporting a vehicle missing from the Elm Street municipal lot or attempting to determine whether it was impounded. License plate Delta Romeo 792. A long pause followed. Carrington heard rapid typing. When the dispatcher returned, her voice had become noticeably tense. Mr. Carrington? Yes, sir. The vehicle was towed earlier today. The authorizing officer was... She paused again. Officer Grant Rourke, badge 714. The listed violation is obstruction of a designated emergency fire zone. Carrington's eyes narrowed. He looked toward the faded yellow curb some distance away. He knew Rourke's name. It appeared at the top of a very thick personnel file sitting inside the district attorney's office. Which company received the vehicle? Harlan Towing, sir. The yard is located along Route 9. Thank you. Carrington ended the call. He did not contact the police chief and demand an explanation. He did not order a patrol officer to collect him. He opened a rideshare application and requested transportation. The drive to the towing yard carried him toward the industrial edge of the county. Harlan Towing was a sprawling dirt lot graveyard filled with wrecked vehicles and surrounded by chain-link fencing topped with razor wire. The smell of diesel fuel and rotting garbage hung heavily in the air. Carrington entered the small, suffocating portable building that served as the front office. Behind scratched, bullet-resistant glass sat Wade Harlan, a heavy-set man with grease-stained hands and a smug expression. Can I help you? Wade grunted without looking up from the dirty tabloid in front of him. I am here to retrieve my vehicle, a midnight blue Audi A6, Carrington replied, his voice smooth and dangerously controlled. Wade entered information into an ancient computer. Yeah, I have it, blocking a fire lane. He glanced toward the screen. That will be a $250 towing fee, $100 for the dolly, and a $75 overnight storage charge. It has not been stored overnight, Carrington said quietly. Anything left here after closing is charged overnight, Wade replied with a grin. Town ordinance total is $425, cash only. Carrington stared through the glass. A rear office door stood partially open. Inside, Officer Grant Rourke sat on a folding chair, drinking cheap beer and silently laughing. Rourke made direct eye contact with Carrington, raised the can in a mocking toast, and released a booming laugh. It was an open display of authority. A message. I can take your property. I can humiliate and inconvenience you, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. Carrington never looked away from Rourke. He reached into his pocket, removed his money clip, and counted $425 in crisp bills. He pushed the money beneath the glass. I require an itemized, stamped receipt, Carrington said. I also want a copy of the police authorization form. Whatever, Wade muttered. He seized the money, printed a crude receipt, and pushed a release form toward Carrington. Sign here. Carrington entered the dirt lot. His beautiful car was coated in a thick layer of dust. He slowly inspected it. Fresh, deep scratches marked the lower front bumper where the towing chains had been attached improperly. Carrington removed his phone and carefully photographed the damage, the license plate, the condition of the lot, and the receipt. He entered the Audi and started the engine. As he drove through the gate, he saw Rourke standing near his cruiser with a satisfied smile across his face. Carrington did not glare at him. He did not make an obscene gesture. As cool air moved across his face, his mind shifted into a level of strategic calculation that Rourke could not begin to understand. Rourke believed this was a street fight. He thought he had won a territorial battle. But Julian Carrington did not fight on the streets. He fought in courtrooms, and he was about to unleash the crushing weight of the law upon the Oak Ridge Police Department. The district attorney's office began operating with terrifying quietness. Carrington summoned his chief investigator, Camille Sutton into his office. Sutton was a former FBI forensic accountant who had left the bureau in search of a quieter life, only to become deeply bored until Carrington recruited her. She was brilliant, relentless, and deeply skeptical of local law enforcement. Carrington pushed the towing receipt and photographs of the damaged Audi across his mahogany desk. "Officer Grant Rourke illegally towed my car," he said flatly. Sutton raised one eyebrow. "You're joking. He towed the district attorney's car. The arrogance is almost impressive." "It is more than arrogance," Carrington replied, pressing his fingertips together. "It is the illusion of invulnerability." He leaned back. "He did it to humiliate me. He did it because he believes a badge makes him a king." Carrington's expression hardened. "But the tow itself is not what concerns me most. What concerns me is the operation at Harlan Towing." He pointed to the receipt. "Cash only, immediate, excessive fees, and Rourke was sitting in the rear office drinking beer while I paid them." Sutton sat straighter. She could sense the possibility of a much larger case. "You believe they are operating an extortion scheme?" "I do not believe it. I know it." Carrington continued. "An officer like Rourke does not suddenly choose one towing company without an established relationship." He slid another folder across the desk. "I want every parking-related impound record and tow authorization issued by Grant Rourke during the last several years. Cross-reference everyone with Harlan Towing." He held Sutton's gaze. "Then conduct a complete financial investigation into Wade Harlan, his limited liability company, and every person connected to the business." "Julian," Sutton said, abandoning formal titles, "once we open this door, the police union will declare war on this office." She continued carefully. "Chief Hale and the old guard may interfere with prosecutions. Officers could refuse to answer subpoenas or organize a coordinated work stoppage." "Let them," Carrington replied, his voice as hard as stone. "I was elected to clean up this county." His eyes darkened. "If we must tear the precinct down to its foundation, bring me a sledgehammer." A secret investigative center began operating from a windowless basement beneath the district attorney's building. Only Carrington, Sutton, and two trusted paralegals were permitted access. What they uncovered was so deeply rooted and breathtakingly corrupt that it left Carrington physically sickened. Sutton covered the basement walls with enormous flowcharts. The evidence was devastating. During the period under review, Officer Grant Rourke had authorized more than 1,200 vehicle tows. An extraordinary 92% of those vehicles had been sent exclusively to Harlan Towing. Rourke had completely bypassed the city's rotating list of licensed and bonded towing companies. But the demographic pattern transformed ordinary corruption into a civil rights atrocity. "Look at the heat map," Sutton said, pointing a laser toward an enormous map of Oak Ridge County. The wealthy, predominantly white neighborhoods on the north side were nearly empty. The south side was covered with red markers. "He is targeting minority communities," Carrington observed, his jaw tightening. "Low-income housing developments, apartment buildings, and factory parking lots." "Exactly," Sutton said. "He chooses people who are least able to fight back. Single mothers, shift workers, and immigrants." She pointed toward individual case records. "He invents violations. He claims vehicles are blocking sidewalks that do not exist or says registrations have expired when they remain valid. Then he calls Wade Harlan. Harlan takes the car and demands at least $400 in cash before releasing it." "What happens when the owner cannot pay?" Carrington asked. He already knew the answer, but he needed to hear Sutton say it. "After 30 days, Harlan declares the vehicle abandoned, files a mechanic's lien, and sells it at auction." Sutton removed a financial dossier. "Sometimes the vehicles are simply dismantled for scrap." She placed another document on the table. "But this is the decisive evidence. I investigated the ownership structure of Harlan Towing." She pointed toward the document. "Wade Harlan is not the only owner." Sutton placed a record from the Secretary of State's office in front of Carrington. "Harlan is the registered agent. A silent partner owns 50% of the company through a shell corporation called Blue Line Logistics. The partner's name is Marissa Harlan." Carrington studied the name. "His wife?" "Yes," Sutton replied grimly. "Marissa Harlan's maiden name is Marissa Rourke. She is Grant Rourke's younger sister." the pieces of the conspiracy locked together with devastating clarity. This was not merely personal harassment. It was a large and highly organized racketeering operation. Rourke used his police authority to take vehicles from poor residents under color of law. His brother-in-law held the cars hostage for cash. The profits returned to Rourke through a shell company controlled by his sister. Over several years, the organization had taken nearly $1 million from the county's most vulnerable residents. A cold, righteous clarity settled over Carrington. "This is not an administrative misconduct case," he said. "This is a federal racketeering case." He began listing the violations: RICO, extortion under color of official authority; wire fraud; deprivation of civil rights. "If we present this to a local grand jury, the investigation will leak," Sutton warned. "The old guard has informants in the clerk's office." "We are not keeping this local," Carrington replied quietly. "I am contacting the state attorney general." His eyes hardened. "And we are bringing in the FBI's Civil Rights Division." Unaware of the blade hanging over him, Rourke became even more arrogant. Believing he had successfully intimidated the district attorney, he began openly threatening members of Carrington's staff. Rourke stopped Talia Brooks, Carrington's chief of staff, and a gifted young attorney who had helped draft the proposed police reform legislation. Rain fell against her windshield as Rourke approached and aimed a heavy flashlight directly into her eyes. "License and registration," he ordered. "Officer, why did you stop me?" Talia asked, shielding her eyes. Her voice trembled slightly, but she remained firm. "Broken tail light," Rourke lied. He leaned closer to the open window. His breath smelled of stale tobacco. "You work for Carrington, don't you?" "Yes." "Tell your boss to be careful where he parks," Rourke whispered. His voice contained an unmistakable threat. "Streets can be dangerous. Bad things happen to expensive cars." He did not issue a citation. He simply returned to his cruiser, leaving Talia sitting in the rain, shaking with anger. When she reported the encounter, Carrington did not react visibly. He merely nodded. Rourke was digging his own grave with extraordinary efficiency. Carrington picked up a secure phone and called Adrian Bell, the district's lead federal prosecutor. "Adrian, this is Julian. I have a case for you. It involves a local RICO conspiracy connected to the Oak Ridge Police Department." Carrington continued, "I have the documentary trail, financial connections, and a clear pattern of civil rights violations." "How large is it?" Bell asked. "Large enough to end careers." Carrington leaned forward. "We need federal wiretap authorization for 3 telephones. I want to hear every conversation between Grant Rourke and Wade Harlan." The federal investigative system came alive. For months, Rourke and Harlan unknowingly became the central figures in their own FBI surveillance operation. Agents sat inside unmarked vehicles near Harlan Towing, listening as Rourke called in fabricated violations, laughed about targeting minority motorists, and explicitly demanded his share of the cash. The investigative net closed tightly around them. There were no gaps. When the operation was ready, a convoy of black federal vehicles entered Oak Ridge County. Rourke's illusion of power shattered. The raid unfolded with the precise and synchronized efficiency only the federal government could produce. There were no local police sirens. No courtesy calls were made to Oak Ridge's police chief. No warning was provided. Matte black SUVs and armored tactical vehicles descended simultaneously upon Harlan Towing, the suburban home shared by Wade and Marissa Harlan, and the modest house where Grant Rourke slept. Rourke awoke to a sound he had inflicted upon countless other people, but never imagined hearing inside his own home. His front door exploded from its hinges. "FBI, federal warrant, show us your hands." Rourke stumbled from bed as his heart slammed against his ribs. Instinctively, he reached toward the service weapon resting on his nightstand. Before his fingers touched the metal, the bedroom door was kicked open. 3 heavily armed FBI tactical agents entered. Their rifles were aimed directly at his chest. A blinding tactical light pinned him against the wall. "Do not move toward that weapon," the lead agent commanded. "Hands on your head, turn around." Wearing only boxer shorts, Rourke raised his hands. Confusion battled with the arrogance that had shaped his entire career. "Wait," he stammered. "I'm Oak Ridge Police. I'm an officer. You're making a serious mistake." "We know exactly who you are," said Special Agent in Charge Caleb Monroe as he entered carrying a thick stack of federal documents. "Grant Rourke, you are under arrest for violations of the Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, extortion under color of official authority, and and deprivation of civil rights under color of law. The federal charges struck Rourke like a physical blow. Rico. The color disappeared from his face. Agents pressed him against his own dresser and locked cold steel handcuffs around his wrist. The horrifying reality finally became clear. This was not an internal affairs inquiry. This was not a minor disciplinary complaint handled by a friendly police chief. He was in the custody of the United States Department of Justice. At the same moment, Harlan Towing was being dismantled. Federal agents flooded the dirt lot. They seized computers, filing cabinets, business records, and the contents of a concealed floor safe containing more than $80,000 in undocumented cash. Wade Harlan collapsed before agents even placed him in handcuffs. Standing outside in his sleepwear as investigators searched his wife's home office, he immediately requested a cooperation agreement. The loyalty between Wade and Rourke disappeared the moment Wade faced a mandatory federal prison sentence. News of the raids struck the Oak Ridge Police Department with explosive force. Police Chief Preston Hale, a broad, red-faced man who had protected Rourke for years, stormed into the district attorney's office. He ignored the reception desk and threw open the doors to Carrington's suite. "What's going on, Julian?" Hale roared, slamming both palms onto the district attorney's desk. "Federal agents dragged one of my senior officers from his home in his underwear. They bypassed my entire chain of command." Hale glared across the desk. "You arranged this." Carrington did not flinch. He calmly finished signing a motion, placed the cap on his fountain pen, and looked up. "Sit down, Preston, or remain standing." His tone was cold. "But lower your voice." "You brought the FBI into my department over a parking dispute," Hale spat. His confidence weakened beneath Carrington's stare. "You are destroying an officer's life because he towed your precious Audi." "I brought the FBI into your department because you allowed a criminal organization to operate from inside your locker room," Carrington replied. He rose from his chair. Carrington lifted a thick-bound investigative report and threw it across the desk. It landed at Hale's feet. "That is a forensic accounting of Grant Rourke's towing activity." Carrington's voice sharpened. "More than 1,000 vehicles, nearly $1 million taken from Oak Ridge County's poorest and most vulnerable residents. The money was directed into a shell corporation controlled by Rourke's sister." Carrington leaned forward. "He did not merely tow my car, Preston. He terrorized the South Side while you protected him." Carrington's eyes burned. "And I possess recordings of the entire conspiracy obtained through federally authorized wiretaps." Hale stared at the dossier. The color disappeared from his face. "Wiretaps. Financial records. Rico." The old strategy of bearing misconduct could not survive a federal indictment. "The police union," Hale began weakly. "Will not assist him," Carrington interrupted. "I spoke with the union president. After I explained the extortion charges in the FBI civil rights investigation, he stated clearly that the union would not finance Rourke's defense." Carrington moved closer. "He is completely alone." Years of frustration with the broken system burned behind his eyes. "I told you I would clean up this county. Rourke was the infection. Consider this the amputation." Carrington pointed toward the door. "Now leave my office and attempt to save whatever remains of your department's reputation." Inside a federal holding cell, Grant Rourke sat shivering on a stainless steel bench. For the first time in his police career, he possessed no power. He had used his badge as a weapon. Now it was gone. Waiting for him were a federal judge, a jury, and the terrifying knowledge that he would be judged by the same legal system he had manipulated for years. The federal prosecution of the United States versus Grant Rourke was not a battle. It was a methodical and clinical destruction of his defense. From the moment the heavy courthouse doors opened, it was clear that Rourke's reign had reached its end. The courtroom was filled beyond capacity. Reporters occupied the rear benches. Residents from the South Side, people who had suffered silently under Rourke's authority, filled the gallery. Federal prosecutor Adrian Bell presented the government's case with surgical precision. He did not depend on theatrical speeches. He relied upon an overwhelming mountain of indisputable evidence. Victim after victim appeared before the jury. Single mothers described losing jobs because they no longer had transportation. Elderly residents explained how their only vehicles had been sold for almost nothing. College students testified that their savings had disappeared into Harlan Towing's fabricated fees. But the decisive blow was not the emotional testimony of the victims. It was not Camille Sutton's precise explanation of the forensic accounting. It was Wade Harlan. Desperate to avoid spending the remainder of his life in federal prison, Wade accepted an aggressive plea agreement and became a government witness. When his name was called, a suffocating silence filled the courtroom. He wore a wrinkled suit that fit poorly, sharply contrasting with the grease-covered work clothes he normally wore. As he raised his hand and swore to tell the truth, he refused to look toward the defense table. Wade did not merely betray his brother-in-law, he destroyed him. Guided by Adrian Bell's precise questions, Wade described the operation from its beginning. He explained the coded phrases Rourke used to identify profitable targets. He described cash payments delivered inside brown paper bags during family gatherings while children played nearby. Then the prosecution introduced the centerpiece of Wade's testimony, the ledger. Wade gave prosecutors a detailed handwritten accounting book that Marissa had hidden beneath the floorboards of their home. Every unlawful tow was recorded. Every fabricated violation was listed. Every division of the cash was documented. It was a complete map of corruption. Still, Bell reserved the most devastating evidence for the end of the prosecution's case. He submitted a flash drive containing the FBI's wiretap recordings. The courtroom speakers came alive. Grant Rourke's recorded voice filled the room, dripping with contempt, entitlement, and arrogance. "I have another live one for you, Wade," Rourke said on the recording. The soft clicking of his cruiser's turn signal could be heard in the background. "She's parked near the Cypress housing complex, silver Honda Civic. The tags are valid and the car is legally parked, but I'm writing it as a public nuisance blocking a hydrant." Rourke laughed. "Let the single mother ride the bus and think about her choices. Charge the maximum storage fee." He continued casually, "I need that new cedar deck for the backyard." An audible gasp passed through the gallery. Several jurors physically recoiled, their faces twisted with disgust. Julian Carrington sat motionless in the front row. His expression revealed nothing. His eyes remained fixed on the defense table. Grant Rourke collapsed emotionally. The arrogant patrol officer who once terrorized residents had disappeared. He shrank into his chair and buried his face in his trembling hands, attempting to escape the judgment of the jury and the public. He could no longer hide behind police solidarity. The entire courtroom had heard what he truly was, a predator disguised as a protector. Before the defense could meaningfully present its case, Rourke surrendered. He approached the bench with his head lowered. His attorney announced that he would plead guilty to every federal charge. The criminal case was over, but Julian Carrington's campaign against corruption was being fought on two separate fronts. While federal prosecutors secured Rourke's imprisonment, Carrington prepared to destroy the political and financial structure that had allowed the officer to operate. As district attorney, Carrington could not personally file a civil lawsuit against the municipality. His former law school roommate, Donovan Price, faced no such restriction. Price was a notoriously aggressive civil rights lawyer. After Rourke's guilty plea became part of the federal record, Carrington arranged for Price to receive the unsealed evidence file. Using the mountain of judicially validated evidence, Price filed an enormous multi-million-dollar class-action civil rights lawsuit against Oak Ridge County, the Oak Ridge Police Department, and Grant Rourke personally. The lawsuit was a masterpiece of legal destruction. It alleged a long-standing institutional failure to supervise, train, and discipline police officers. Rourke's 24 buried civilian complaints were presented as direct evidence that municipal leadership had knowingly enabled the extortion operation. The city council and Mayor Preston Hale panicked. The evidence was impossible to defend. Allowing the case to reach a civil jury could produce a verdict large enough to bankrupt the municipality. The city surrendered and agreed to a $6 million settlement. The money was placed into a restitution fund for the hundreds of people Rourke had victimized. However, Carrington had not engineered the lawsuit solely to recover money. The binding settlement contained a non-negotiable condition. Mayor Hale was legally required to establish and fully fund an independent civilian police oversight board. It was the exact institution the county's political establishment had blocked for years. Police Chief Preston Hale understood the danger of remaining in office. Terrified that he could be included in an additional federal investigation concerning the buried complaints, he quietly emptied his office and submitted retirement papers. He left Oak Ridge County in disgrace. Then came the administrative punishment that finally destroyed Rourke's remaining hope. Because Rourke had pleaded guilty to serious federal felonies committed under color of law, a state tribunal invoked a rarely used punitive municipal statute. After a brief hearing, Grant Rourke was permanently stripped of his law enforcement pension. Every dollar he had contributed to the retirement system throughout his career was seized and applied toward restitution for his victims. He was left with nothing. No savings, no future, no financial protection. During his formal sentencing, Rourke stood before Federal District Judge Celeste Marlowe. He wore an orange prison uniform. His wrists were attached to a heavy chain around his waist. He appeared decades older. The terrified, empty eyes of a ruined man had replaced the smug expression he once carried. "Mr. Rourke," Judge Marlowe began. Her voice moved coldly through the courtroom. "Police officers receive extraordinary and almost unimaginable power through the public trust. You weaponized that trust." She looked directly at him. "You did not protect or serve your community. You hunted its residents and extorted them. You deliberately selected people whom you believe possessed no voice, no financial influence, and no legal protection." Her expression hardened. "And you acted from greed, racial hostility, and vindictive spite." Judge Marlowe adjusted her glasses. You believed your badge protected you from consequences. You believed you stood above the law. Let this proceeding serve as a permanent warning to anyone who wears a uniform. She paused. The law becomes an extraordinarily heavy object when it falls upon the person who has abused it. Judge Marlowe sentenced Grant Rourke to 12 years in federal prison without the possibility of early release or parole. United States Marshals seized Rourke by the arms and prepared to lead him toward the holding cells. He stopped and looked over his shoulder. His eyes moved past the reporters and the victims. For the final time, he looked directly at Julian Carrington. Carrington did not gloat. He did not smile in victory. He gave Rourke one slow and deliberate nod. It was a silent acknowledgement that a promise had been fulfilled. The district attorney picked up his briefcase, turned away from the disgraced officer, and left the courtroom. He was ready to continue rebuilding his county. The reinforced door of a federal prison cell closed behind Grant Rourke with a deafening metallic finality. It was a sound he would hear repeatedly. He was no longer Officer Rourke. He was now an inmate identified by a federal prison number. Because he had been a law enforcement officer, placing him within the general prison population could have been a death sentence. Federal prisons contained many people who carried a deep and violent hatred for police officers. For his own protection, Rourke was assigned to a special housing unit reserved for high-profile prisoners, government informants, and disgraced law enforcement officers. In practical terms, it was solitary confinement. For 23 hours each day, Rourke remained inside a concrete cell measuring approximately 6 feet by 9 feet. It contained a thin mattress on a steel platform, a stainless steel toilet, and a narrow strip of frosted glass that allowed only a weak trace of daylight to enter. The man who had once patrolled Oak Ridge inside a climate-controlled cruiser, issuing commands and watching citizens tremble, now possessed no control at all. He decided nothing. He was told when to awaken. He was told when to eat the tasteless food pushed through a slot in the door. He was permitted a single hour of exercise inside a chain-link enclosure under the supervision of armed guards. Inside the suffocating silence, the arrogance that had defined his life decayed into paranoia. Rourke possessed endless hours to replay every decision. The midnight blue Audi, the smug telephone call to Wade Harlan, the childish pleasure of watching the district attorney's car dragged away. For one brief moment of vindictive satisfaction, Rourke had sacrificed a comfortable life, a guaranteed pension, and his freedom. While Rourke deteriorated in prison, Oak Ridge County entered a painful but extraordinary period of rebirth. Julian Carrington did not treat Rourke's conviction as the end of his work. Destroying the towing conspiracy had removed the most infected part of the system. Carrington intended to heal the entire institution. The $6 million civil settlement destroyed the political influence of the old guard. Mayor Preston Hale, terrified of further federal investigation, granted nearly every reform Carrington demanded. The Oak Ridge Civilian Police Oversight Board was formally established. It was not an empty advisory committee filled with political appointees. Carrington ensured that it possessed subpoena authority, independent investigators, and the power to recommend the immediate termination of officers who violated civil rights. The remaining old guard inside the Oak Ridge Police Department did not surrender quietly. Captain Nolan Stryker, a veteran commander and close ally of the former chief, attempted to organize a hidden rebellion. He encouraged officers to slow their work deliberately. Police response times to the South Side increased. Stryker hoped a rise in crime would pressure local leaders into dismantling the Oversight Board. Carrington recognized the plan before it could fully develop. He called Camille Sutton into his office. Stryker's manipulating the department, Carrington said, studying weekly dispatch records showing that response times in minority communities had doubled. He believes he can hold the city hostage. He is using the union as protection, Sutton replied, tapping a pen against her notebook. The patrol officers will not speak. They fear retaliation. We do not need them to speak, Carrington answered. We possess the data. His voice remained cold and certain. Audit the GPS systems installed in every patrol cruiser assigned to Stryker's sector. Compare the periods of inactivity with incoming emergency calls. Carrington leaned forward. If officers were sitting in parking lots while citizens waited for help, they will not merely be fired. They will be prosecuted for official misconduct and reckless endangerment. The audit was swift and brutal. Sutton discovered digital evidence showing that Stryker had explicitly ordered patrol units to delay responses to nonviolent calls from the South Side. Carrington did not request a private meeting with the police department. He took the evidence directly to the Oversight Board's first public hearing. Inside a packed city council chamber with news cameras recording, Carrington presented the GPS records. He publicly accused Captain Nolan Stryker of weaponizing public safety to gain political leverage. Under the glare of public scrutiny and facing the possibility of joining Rourke in federal prison, Stryker's confidence collapsed. He resigned in disgrace. 3 of his most loyal and toxic sergeants departed with him. The removal sent a shockwave through the precinct. The message was unmistakable. The era of the untouchable badge had ended. To replace the departing old guard, Mayor Hale appointed an outside reformer as chief of police. Chief Elias Caldwell was known for transparency, accountability, and community-centered policing. Caldwell immediately introduced mandatory de-escalation training, strict reviews of every vehicle impound, and a zero-tolerance policy against racial profiling. Conditions on the South Side slowly began improving. Money from the $6 million settlement entered the community. Families financially devastated by the towing scheme received substantial restitution payments. Single mothers recovered lost savings. Residents who had lost employment because they could not retrieve their vehicles received enough money to rebuild their lives. For the first time in generations, many South Side residents viewed the district attorney's office not as another instrument of oppression, but as a shield. The Harlan family was permanently destroyed by the conspiracy. Wade Harlan served his sentence inside a minimum security federal facility. His marriage to Marissa collapsed. Marissa, who had designed the shell company structure, avoided prison by cooperating completely and surrendering every hidden asset. However, she was left financially ruined. Federal authorities seized her house, bank accounts, and vehicles. She moved into a small, deteriorating apartment outside the county and worked overnight shifts inside a fulfillment warehouse. She would live permanently with a federal felony conviction. The family's empire of petty tyranny had been reduced to ashes. But Grant Rourke's story had not yet reached its final chapter. Years later, intense summer heat once again covered Oak Ridge County. The city had fundamentally changed. Crime had stabilized. Relations between police officers and the community had reached unprecedented levels of trust. Julian Carrington had won re-election by a historic landslide, receiving more than 80% of the vote. He was no longer viewed merely as a district attorney. He had become a rising political figure and a leading future candidate for governor. Talia Brooks, the chief of staff whom Rourke once threatened during a rainy traffic stop, had become deputy district attorney. She led a specialized unit investigating unresolved civil rights cases. The district attorney's office operated as an efficient institution of justice, unmoved by wealth and no longer obedient to the county's old network of influence. Inside federal prison, time had been merciless to Grant Rourke. Years of isolation had destroyed his physical strength and weakened his mental stability. His hair had thinned and become gray. His once broad and threatening posture had collapsed into a permanent stoop. The remaining years of his sentence pressed against him during every waking moment. For the first part of his imprisonment, Rourke continued fighting. He submitted repeated appeals alleging entrapment, selective prosecution, and excessive punishment. Every appeal was rejected. The evidence was overwhelming. The corruption had been too severe. Desperation eventually stripped away his pride layer by layer until only fear and need remained. After exhausting every legal option, Rourke did something he once would have considered unthinkable. He requested a pen and one sheet of paper from a correctional officer. Sitting on the edge of his steel bed with trembling hands, he wrote to the only man he believed could recommend that the Department of Justice reduce his sentence. He wrote to District Attorney Julian Carrington. The letter was a carefully constructed attempt at emotional manipulation. Rourke did not truly apologize for the lives he had destroyed. He apologized that events had gone too far. He described the psychological damage of solitary confinement. He asked Carrington, as a man of faith and law, to show mercy. He requested a letter supporting a reduction in his sentence. Rourke promised to leave Oak Ridge County, change his name, and never return. The letter eventually reached Carrington's office. Talia Brooks entered his spacious corner office and placed a plain white envelope marked with federal prison insignia on the desk. "You should read this," she said, her expression unreadable. "It came from Grant Rourke." Carrington picked up the envelope. He opened it with a silver letter opener and unfolded the line sheet inside. The handwriting was cramped and unsteady, unlike the bold and aggressive writing Rourke once used on fabricated citations. Carrington read the letter in complete silence. His expression never changed. He did not smile in satisfaction. He did not show pity. He read the words of a broken man begging for the same mercy he had denied to hundreds of innocent residents. "What does he want?" Talia asked. "A recommendation supporting a reduction in his sentence," Carrington answered quietly. "He claims he has learned his lesson. He says confinement is destroying his mind." "Are you going to respond?" Carrington leaned back and looked through the office window. Below him, Oak Ridge moved with a steady and peaceful rhythm. He remembered the heat map Camille Sutton had created years earlier. He remembered the sea of red markers clustered over the county's poorest neighborhoods. He remembered the single mothers forced to choose between feeding their children and paying an extortion fee to recover their vehicles. He remembered the unfiltered arrogance of an officer who treated the law as a tool for personal profit. "Mercy is a virtue," Carrington said, "but justice is a requirement." He opened the lower drawer of his desk. Inside was a thick file labeled United States versus Rourke, archived. Carrington searched through the carefully organized pages until he found what he needed. He removed one sheet of paper. It was not a legal brief. It was not an FBI wiretap transcript. It was a photocopy of the dirty receipt issued by Harlan Towing when Carrington recovered his Audi. The receipt for $425. Cash only. Carrington picked up a thick black marker and wrote 3 words across the top. "Denied. Serve your time." He did not write a letter. He did not explain his decision. He folded the photocopy, placed it inside a clean envelope, and addressed it to Rourke's federal inmate number. Carrington handed the envelope to Talia. "Mail this," he instructed, "then close the file." He looked toward the city outside. "We are finished with Grant Rourke forever." When the envelope arrived at the prison, Rourke tore it open with trembling, desperate fingers. He prayed that it contained a lifeline. Instead, he found the photocopied towing receipt. He read the words written across the top. The final trace of hope disappeared from his face. The paper slipped from his hands and floated to the concrete floor. Rourke sat on his steel bed, covered his face, and finally wept. He had towed a car because he wanted to teach another man a lesson. Instead, he had dismantled his own life piece by piece until nothing remained except the walls of a prison cell. As the sun lowered behind the Oak Ridge skyline, Julian Carrington left the courthouse. He walked with the calm, confident stride of a man who had fulfilled his promises to the community. He entered the municipal parking lot. The faded yellow lines of the abandoned fire lane had been removed. The area had been repainted into clean and properly measured parking spaces. Carrington approached the same midnight blue Audi A6. He unlocked it, entered the driver's seat, and started the engine. The dashboard illuminated the interior with a soft glow. As he left the parking lot and entered Elm Street, no one watched him from the shadows. No corrupt officer searched his license plate. No tow truck waited around the corner. There was only the gentle hum of the engine and the undeniable presence of justice inside a county that had finally learned how to defend itself. Power without accountability is a dangerous weapon. But as Grant Rourke learned, arrogance is the ultimate trap. He believed his badge made him a king. He believed it gave him the right to humiliate, extort, and steal from vulnerable people. Then he targeted the wrong district attorney. Julian Carrington did not respond with violence or uncontrolled anger. He responded with the devastating weight of the law. He permanently changed Oak Ridge County and destroyed a corrupt organization. The hunter became the hunted. A petty parking dispute ended with a 12-year federal prison sentence. True justice does not boast. It executes. What did you think of District Attorney Julian Carrington's calculated response? Did Grant Rourke receive exactly the punishment he deserved, or was the sentence too severe? Share your opinion in the comments. If you enjoyed this story of justice and consequences, press the like button, share the video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful, true-to-life stories in which corrupt people finally face the consequences of their actions.